History that we learned had nothing to do with what went on in the black community.
Made it all black. None of the white stations would service up fences like this. The children growing up here had all that they needed to thrive.
Community raised kids.
Events and people and places in the rich history of Halls Hill.
It was hard being black in Arlington. And the churches and the people in the churches, if there was a need that we needed to come together, we would do that. We didn't have room for competitiveness. We were all poor people trying to make it in this ugly world that we lived in. This was one community. I mean, we had two churches, but it was one community, and we did a lot of things together.
Mount Salvation always came together with Callaway. And when we would have Vacation Bible School here one week, we would go to Callaway the next week. And then we would have the minister come here sometimes and preach, and the minister from Mount Salvation would go there. And we tried to bond with all of the churches.
We have to remember that this is just a building, but the church is also the people, and that's what is important. The people that go out and do things, the people that have worked in the church, the people that have worked in the community, that's what is important, that legacy.
To me, this is a wonderful church. I love this church. It's like a family. It actually started in Pelhamtown, and that's when they got together and went from house to house, and they had prayer meeting, and they had services on each Sunday, and then they wanted to buy a place to have a church. And this is when they decided to come to this area to have the church. And they paid $80 for the property that we're on at the present time.
I grew up here in Callaway United Methodist Church. It was organized in 1866 on Sag Miller's farm. A gentleman by the name of Sam Smith lived there. We believe he was a laborer there. And he started having prayer services in his home on Sag Miller's farm. And Sag Miller's farm was actually located where the current Knights of Columbus is. Maybe 10 years later, they erected a small church. And the church was in the 4800 block of Lee Highway. We've had churches in 3 different places on Lee Highway. The first formal church was built on this site in 1904. And then they began to have ministers. And Winston Callaway was one of the earlier pastors. And that's the church was named after him. Well, like all churches in the 1800s, right after the Civil War, the churches were the only place that would be owned by African American people in their community. And that was the place where it was like a safe haven.
Mount Salvation, like all of the black churches in Arlington County, supported the local businesses, black-owned businesses in the area. It was like a partnership with the local businesses.
Everything was centered around the churches in black communities then. Everything was centered around Mount Salvation in Callaway. They served as social places, places for social gathering. For an example, the churches were the largest places in the community, owned by the community. So the school, John M. Langston, was very small. And anything that they needed to have as an event in the school that was a large event, they would host in the churches.
Mount Salvation is a place that housed John M. Langston's school. John M. Langston was called summer school at first, and they had the classes here until John M. Langston was built.
That's what this community was all about. It was all about ensuring that the children growing up here had all that they needed to thrive. And I think that as Most black churches during that time, during the late 1800s and early 1900s, any important decisions that were made about the community were made in the churches. Well, Callaway was one of two churches that opened the doors for meetings to talk about integration of public facilities and schools in the county. It was dangerous to do that then. The Nazi Party, they were here in Clarendon. They had a office on Wilson Boulevard. And when we would have meetings here at the church to try to intimidate the people at the meetings, Rockwell and some of his troopers would just walk in here, storm in here and sit down. My understanding is there were many threats that this church would be burned down. But Callaway continued to host the meetings and to fight for the integration of schools, and all four of the students that integrated were from Halls Hill. 2 went to Mount Salvation and 2 went to Callaway. They were the first 4 students to integrate the schools in the state of Virginia.
Well, there were a lot of people. I know I was one of the participants that worked in the community to try to get rid of segregation, and we worked hard.
In 1959, the county issued a decree of condemnation at our cemetery to remove graves to widen Lee Highway. They say 6 graves. Our records show 9 graves. I don't know which is accurate, but some graves were removed from the cemetery. And we found out from some of the historians in the state that back then, when they reinterred those bodies, that they wouldn't have necessarily put them in individual graves like they were here. They probably put them in a mass grave, and it's unmarked. So we're still trying to find out where in Coleman Cemetery, because we know where Coleman's is, where those bodies were interred so that we can put a proper marker there. Well, fast forward, we were looking to see if our cemetery would fit the criteria to be a historic designated place in Arlington. During the process, we had what was called probing, where an archaeologist came, and this instrument could detect whether or not there were any graves that were underground that were not visible. We have 46 visible grave sites there. When the probing was done, they found 43 more.
When I went to school, the history that we learned had nothing to do with what went on in the Black community, and that is history. And that is something that everybody should know. We need to know what went on, because there are a lot of Blacks who have done things, and they're not getting anything said about them, and that's not fair.
Now, our community has drastically changed. We have a lot of new people in the community. We have $1 million homes next to homes that have been here for 100 years. Callaway continues to make sure that those people are not lost in this new Halls Hill. And the churches continue to try to make sure that those people that need services and need outreach continue to get them through the church.
We have a missionary department here that assists anyone who needs help. And actually, during this epidemic, they have sent out cards to families in the neighborhood for food or for whatever that they might need.
I want the students to realize and understand and know that the Arlington that they live in today was not always like it is now. That it was once rural, that all of the privileges that these kids have today, they weren't always prevalent for everybody in Arlington County.
Just remember that a lot of people fought so that they might have the freedom to obtain a good education. They should feel blessed because Arlington County has a wonderful school system, one of the best school systems in the nation.
Arlington at one time was very, very segregated, and it was very difficult to be Black in Arlington. It hasn't always been the Arlington that it is now, and that we have grown and that we have changed. And it's real good, and I'm glad that they can live in this Arlington. But it would be good for them to know the history so that they can have a good respect for what some people have gone through in order for them to be where they are.
We all have the same blood, and we need to work together. God put us all here for a reason, and that reason is for us to love one another and work together.